That means that we have another issue, Mr. President, which can possibly reach the Supreme Court. Because the Constitution talks about appropriations, that the Congress may not increase the appropriations as recommended by the President. So, very simple lang naman yung interpretation ko po. When the word appropriations is used, it does not distinguish between programmed and unprogrammed appropriations.
Well, Mr. President, the unprogrammed is really not part of the total of the BICAM report or the budget proposed. Okay, so it's obviously that's why it's called unprogrammed. It's unfunded. Now, if you mention about the president has the power to appropriate for the unprogrammed funds based on certain criteria. First of all, it has to come from a source. For example, extra collections from the government, from GOCCs, dividends, extra collections from the BIR, etc., or even loan proceeds, which, as I understand now, even our Secretary of Finance is not really very keen on adding more additional loans because we have to keep our debt to GDP ratio at around 60 to 61%. So this will really come from extra funding that the government is able to collect.
And for the year 2024, there was an extra or an additional mechanism inserted in funding and unprogrammed appropriations. Yun yung sweeping of the so-called idle funds which affected PhilHealth. Sinasabi ko lang yan so that I will also not forget to raise PhilHealth later on. Pero, okay. But Mr. President, yung 400 billion of the items under unprogrammed appropriations na na-release na at na-fund na for so far for the year 2024, what was the legal basis for funding them? Isn't it dagaa, Mr. President?
Yes, Mr. President.
Correct.
That was actually one of the provisions in the GAA that funding from other sources, government revenue, in excess, can fund unprogrammed appropriations.
Correct. So, meaning to say, kahit si unprogrammed is not unprogrammed talaga siya, so hindi siya talaga kasama sa total ni programmed appropriations. But the legal basis, kasi ang general rule sa Constitution natin, no public funds shall be spent except pursuant to an appropriations provided by law. So when those 400 billion items under unprogrammed appropriations were funded, what was the law made as the basis for funding them? Hindi po ba GAA din of 2024?
Yes, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Okay, tama po. Meaning to say, pag sinabing appropriations, kasama si programmed at si unprogrammed. So, Mr. President, with this information, I have no choice but to once again raise this before the Supreme Court, maybe in a new case or siguro, supplemental ba? Alright, supplemental petition before the Supreme Court, Mr. President.
But, Mr. President, just for clarification, anyway, you're the legal expert here. There's really, all GOCCs remit also to the government, excess funds. And then the GAA, the GAA itself is a law. Now, if these are unprogrammed, I understand that the President also has the power to allocate certain funding options for certain programs. Now, when our minority leader raised this issue with the Supreme Court, I know it was very specific for the PhilHealth funds, which was actually savings that is not really an income-generating matter that has to be automatically appropriated to the government, unlike other agencies that any dividends should be transferred to the government. I know that PhilHealth isn't. So with the clarity given by the Supreme Court, we have that guidance already in mind. That's why we did not specifically put a provision exactly like what we had in 2024.
So our chairwoman is informing us that that fourth trigger or fourth mechanism found in the 2024 GAA as about sweeping idle funds is no longer found in our 2025.
Yes, Mr. President.
But then, Mr. President, yung petition ko po sa Supreme Court is different. Actually, separate yun. I have actually 4 cases before the Supreme Court, Mr. President. One is questioning the level of the unprogrammed appropriations. Number 2 is the PhilHealth, the order to sweep 89.9 billion pesos of PhilHealth funds. The third would be the Maharlika Corporation. And the fourth would be our intra-party dispute with the party of Senator Robin Padilla, Mr. President. So these are the 4 cases pending before the Supreme Court, Mr. President. So anyway, at any rate, okay, Mr. President, does this mean, since we increased the unprogrammed appropriations level by 373 billion pesos, does this mean that we transferred from programmed appropriations under the President's budget 373 billion pesos worth of line items, and we transferred this to the unprogrammed appropriations part? Is that a correct statement?
Well, Mr. President, yes, partly
Yes,
some
correct.
of them were transferred. But remember, this is also based on a consultation of what the priorities are. Of course, we always have a wish list of projects and also initiatives, but in the end, we also look at the disbursement rate, the utilization rate.
Meaning to say, yung 373 billion pesos na increase sa unprogrammed appropriations, lahat ng idea doon, lahat ng items na yon, yung PAPs ang tawag yan, lahat ng programs, activities, and projects na yon, were originally found in the President's budget but under programmed appropriations. Is that a correct statement?
Mr. President, some of them
Some?
were not in the original NEP or the President's proposals. Some of them were actually amendments done by institutional amendments done by either houses.
Okay, by Congress. So, does the chairwoman have the, anong tawag mo doon? Breakdown, which, okay, how much of the 373 billion pesos now found in unprogrammed originally came from programmed appropriations under the NEP?
Mr. President, may we be able to submit that to Your Honor with regards to the specific, because it's quite lengthy to go back to all of them.
Just the total, not the total lang, because bakit ko to tinatanong? Because that means that is now the fiscal space made available under programmed appropriations. That's my point, Mr. President. Kaya ang next tanong, of this fiscal space, paano napuno yun? Saan din galing yung mga new PAPs na pinampuno doon sa amount na yun? Doon patungo yung pagtatanong ko po, Mr. President.
As an example, Mr. President, the foreign assisted projects in the NEP of 2025 is 215,649. Now, what the BICAM approved is 66,279. So basically, 149,370 is now in the unprogrammed.
Yes, binaba. Okay, so let's say 149. But definitely more than that amount siguro, no? You're just using that as an example.
Yes, yes. There are also others.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the level for programmed appropriations did not change. Tama po ba yun? From the NEP level, programmed appropriations is still now, the BICAM report level for programmed appropriations is the same as the NEP level. Tama?
Yes, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Meaning to say, kung nagbaba tayo ng 149 billion, inalis natin sa President's programmed appropriations, binaba natin, pero the level is now the same. Therefore, in the budgeting process by Congress came up with at least 149 billion new items which they funded under programmed appropriations. Tama po yun?
Yes, Mr.
Correct,
President.
correct. That's why we need to know the level, Mr. President. But anyway, the chairwoman has promised to give us in writing na lang, no? The level. So that is what happened. And then, Mr. President, if I can ask about the miscellaneous personnel benefits fund, sa NEP, sa President's budget, 163 billion pesos ang level niyan. Sa BICAM report natin, 109 billion pesos. Meaning to say, nag-free up din tayo ng 54 billion pesos. Kasi hindi rin nagbago yung bottom line. Bottom line, the same. So, is it correct to say that the 54 billion pesos na inalis natin sa MPBF ay nalagyan din ng new items by Congress? Tama po ba yun?
Yes, Mr. President. Also for the miscellaneous and personal benefits, there are a lot of reasons. There are reasons also for that. For example, although there are items in the proposed NEP, the reality is also certain job positions are not filled. That's why we also looked at the utilization rate, disbursement rate as in the past.
Yes, and we were able to free up, let us say, MPBF line lang ito,
54
billion. Kaya
Yes,
nga, and
Mr.
then,
President.
since hindi nagbago si bottom line, ibig sabihin nun, nalagay sa ibang mga budget items yon, PAPs, na hindi na nanggaling sa Presidente, nanggaling na po sa Kongreso. Tama po?
Yes,
Tama
Mr.
po, okay. And then, pagdating sa pension and gratuity fund, sa President's budget, 232 billion ang level nito. Ang ending sa ating BICAM report, 144 billion. So, ano to, mga 88 billion pesos din po yung na-free up natin. Tama po? So, ang gusto sabihin, ang dami na natin na-free up. So,
Mr. President, it's true that compared to the NEP, there may have been a decrease, but bearing in mind also that compared to 2024, there's been an increase. And we know that for a fact that the increase can cover the current needs for personal benefits and pensions.
yes, Mr. President. Pero yun lang, I'm just looking up, I'm just pointing out the fiscal space that Congress has freed up under programmed appropriations. Yun po, that's what I'm pointing out. And bago malimutan, we also freed up 74 billion pesos, 74.4 billion pesos sa PhilHealth subsidy. Tama po yun? Which is under programmed appropriations. Tama po?
Yes, Mr. President.
Why did we have to do that, Mr. President? Sa dami na ng... hindi pa tayo makakame up ng total amount of the fiscal space which we have freed up sa programmed appropriations because hindi natin alam yung how much of the 373 billion of new items under unprogrammed appropriations came from program. Hindi pa natin alam eh. But we will add to that the MPBF, we add to that the PGF na mga freed amounts, plus the 74 of the PhilHealth. Kinailangan pa ba natin na i-zero talaga si PhilHealth to free up 74 billion pesos, Mr. President?
I know, Mr. President, that's also the question of many. And I've thought about this long and hard. And there's no denying that PhilHealth has a savings amount of 600 billion Mr. President. And that's also the reason why initially the administration thought of it as a way also to augment certain short fundings that we had, for example, for health workers, etc. Hindi natin maintindihan ba't hindi nila ginagamit yung pera na nandun na meron sila na nakaimbak sa isang, ewan ko kung anong klaseng account yan, savings account, na ang kinikita ay mas mababa pa kesa sa inflation. Mr. President, hindi pwedeng sisihin na nagkulang tayo sa pagbibigay sa kanila. Kasi nga ang daming ang pera na nandyan. Hindi nila pinamimigay ang pera dun sa mga nangangailangan at tinuturuan din natin sila ng leksyon. Kung bigay ka ng bigay, nandun lang yung pera, hindi naman nagagamit. Paano naman yung mga ibang programa rin ng gobyerno na nangangailangan din ng funding? Yun nga yung sinasabi ko, pag meron kang, syempre, di ba, sinasabi natin, 5 yung anak mo, lahat yan kailangan pantay-pantay na mabigyan mo. Totoo yun. Pero sa lahat sa kanila, tinitignan mo rin kung sino may pangangailangan at sino naman ang may kakayanan na itayo rin ang kanyang sarili. Yun din ang sinasabi natin, it's a leadership problem also in PhilHealth and it's a disbursement problem. Gaya nga ng sinabi ni Senator Cynthia, ang problema din sa PhilHealth, hindi rin natin alam kung ano ba talaga yung mga benepisyo natin. Wala tayong card na nagsasabi hanggang dito o ganyan ang maibibigay sa'yo, ang tagal-tagal ng approval minsan, hindi alam ng ating mga kababayan kung paano sila makapag-comply dun sa mga requirements. So ito yung mga nagiging issue. Hindi sila kulang sa pera. At alam ko yung iba talagang pinagdidiinan nito. Pero 600 billion ang meron sila. Samantalang ang dami natin din pangangailangan pagdating sa edukasyon, pagdating sa infrastruktura. Alam mo, maganda talagang magbigay ng social protection, wealth transfer. Importante yan. Pero kailangan din natin ng wealth-generating initiatives kasi hindi natin mapopondohan ang mga ibang bagay na magbibigay ng suporta sa ating mga kababayan kung ang gobyerno ay walang programa na magpapalago ng ating ekonomiya.
I'm reminded of the saying that health is wealth. But I don't think, Mr. President, that we can use funds meant for health so that we will justify that we will generate wealth for the nation.
Mr. President,
so,
the budget of the DOH has increased from last year. So it may not have been an item, for example, in particular for PhilHealth. Pero, meron naman pong increase na nangyari dito sa DOH. From 241,602,000,000 in 2024, yung BICAM natin nasa 247,923. So we are, of course, health is wealth. That's very important. But also, health, the financial situation of our country, the economy, and wealth-generating initiatives are important so that we can support social protection initiatives such as the health sector.
Sige, mag-digress po tayo muna sa health sector. Pero napansin ko po na ang ating final amount sa Department of Health is 247.9 billion pesos sa BICAM report. Mas mababa by 25.7 billion pesos from the GAB, 273.7 billion pesos. So, binawasan pa rin natin ang DOH. And then, ang ating pampalubag-loob lang ay yung level, nung binawasan na, yung ending amount is still higher than the 2024 GAA amount?
Yes, Mr. President.
But why did we reduce it, Mr. President, by 25.7 billion pesos, which is a very significant amount also, Mr. President.
Well, Mr. President, there are certain agencies that we also supported. Like, for example, the Department of Agrarian Reform, we had given them an increase for their budget. We also had given the state universities and colleges an increase in their budget. The DICT, we've also given them an increase. The Department of National Defense also has an increase. So, Mr. President, if possible, we would like to increase all. But then also because of the substantial budget allocation of other departments, we also made sure that departments that are also crucial have a respectable amount that they can operate with.
So, pwede ba nating masabi na itong 74.4 billion pesos ng PhilHealth na ziniro natin ay binigay sa ibang mga ahensya ng gobyerno na sa tingin natin ng ating committee na mas nangangailangan o mas deserving ng amount, at masasabi ba natin na hindi directly health-related yung napuntahan ng 74.4 billion pesos na yon, Mr. President?
Mr. President, hindi sa masasabi nating more deserving, more in need, perhaps.
Yes.
And then also, yes, I think I know where your next question will lead to. But yes, I think transparently you can look that if you look at the increase in some appropriations, they're not health-related.
Yes, they're not health-related. Ngayon, Mr. President, ang problema kasi yung timing din ng pagbaba natin eh. We want to teach them a lesson, pero 74.4 billion pesos tatanggalin natin, isi-zero natin. Pero hindi ba natin alam na pinasa natin dito sa chamber natin yung panukala na pababain ng premium rates. Nababa natin eh. At the same time, inutusan natin sila to increase their compensation packages, which ginawa nila. Tapos hindi lang dagdagan pa, may konsulta, etc. So, ang nangyayari po, Mr. President, we are being conservative with PhilHealth by reducing the subsidy by 74.4 billion pesos at a time when when PhilHealth has now committed to be more proactive, aggressive, and then we are returning some benefits to the direct contributors by lowering the contribution rate, Mr. President. Ganyan ang nangyari. Oh, so, parang hindi makatwiran yung 74.4 billion pesos reduction, wrong timing pa. Oh, now that kung ano yung itinuturo natin sa PhilHealth, pinipressure natin sila, gagawin na nila, tapos ngayon parang pipilayan natin sila para magawa nila yung sinasabi natin gawin nila, Mr. President.
Mr. President, unang-una, hindi ako naniniwala na mapipilayan sila. Kasi nga may pagkukunan pa rin silang 600 bilyon. So sabihin na natin, 70 billion ang hindi na nalaan sa kanila ngayon sa budget. Meron naman silang pagkukunan na 600 bilyon. Ngayon, sa susunod na taon, kung talagang tinupad nila ang kanilang pangako na number 1, mas iigihan nila ang pagbigay ng suporta sa mga may sakit na nangangailangan. Pangalawa, na-implement na yung batas. Ewan ko kung napasa na ba yung batas na yon na bababaan yung premium at hindi na dapat kasama sa batas yung pag-increase ng premium na yon. At saka natin masasabi na, sige, sa susunod na taon, 2026 budget, pwede na nating punuan muli sapagkat nagagamit na nila yung kanilang reserba.
Nakalimutan ko nga i-mention na pinush ko nga sila na magkaroon ng dental services at ngayon nababasa natin that they are also offering dental services, Mr. President.
Exactly, Mr.
to be
President.
covered.
I think this can be evaluated. For example, you have a child who has committed something, you're teaching your child a lesson, hindi naman porket na nag-reform na kaagad, ay ibibigay mo na muli. Kailangan mo nang patunayan rin na masusustain ito, magagawa niya talaga ng tuloy-tuloy. Kaya nga, dito, uulitin ko, at alam ko marami rin ng magtataka dito, no? Pero 600 billion, may pera kang ganon. May mga ibang programa ng gobyerno na pwede ring pondohan. At hindi naman maghihirap ang PhilHealth dahil meron silang pagkukunan para bayaran. Ang problema nga nila noon, hindi nila ginagawa yon. Kaya ngayon, salamat sa inisyatibo nga, sinabi nga natin, yung ating minority leader, sinabi, dapat meron kayong dental benefits o gagawin daw nila o ginagawa na nila. O ngayon may batas pero hindi ko alam, parang hindi pa yata napapasa na hindi muna itataas ang premium, 'di ba? Hindi pa yan batas. 'Di ba? Iamyenda pa lang natin 'yan. Hindi pa yan nangyayari. So sa ngayon, ang daming nagrereklamo na ang taas ng premium ng PhilHealth tumataas, pero ang benepisyo nila hindi pa rin ganyan. Kaya meron pa rin silang nakokolektang premium na mas mataas.
Ang ating problema sa PhilHealth subsidy kasi, Mr. President, is yung formula is provided by law. Yan po, that is the long and short of it. Ngayon, by giving zero subsidy, are we in effect saying that we are suspending that the provisions in the Universal Healthcare Act and the syntax law, so thank you for correcting me, in the syntax law, which provides for that formula, which we discussed during we discussed, I think, during the budget deliberations. We mentioned the formula. So is that what we're doing? Number one, kasi when you give a government agency zero budget, talagang number one ang message dun punishment mo yan. And then, but number two, merong rito na there is a formula. And the formula yields I think, around 74.4 billion pesos ang paggamitin yung formula. Hindi pala 73, I will correct myself. 53.13 billion pesos ang may-yield ng formula, Mr. President, around that amount. So, is it also our message that we are suspending the formula found under the syntax law?
Mr. President, we are not suspending the implementation of a law. What we are saying is that at the moment, it is an unfunded program or law of the government. You know, we have more than 1 trillion pesos of unfunded laws in the country. Maraming mga batas pero nagkukulang ang pondo para dito. Ngayon, the GAA in itself is also a law. I understand the Senate minority leaders mentioned, but this is earmarked. Earmarked ito, so dapat doon talaga napupunta. Pero yung BIR, for example, has also that earmark na they are able to harness or benefit from 1% of their total collections. But because they haven't really reached a certain utilization, the government has not given them that 1% supposedly that would go to them. So, Mr. President, this is not, sadly, the reality is this is not uncommon. And the GAA itself is a law. We have a discretion also to look at the macro picture of a particular time in our society and economy and to see what fiscal space we have.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. But unfortunately, I think when we apply the formula for what is to be remitted to PhilHealth under the UHCA, this is based on actual revenues or collections. So, wala pong reason na masabi nating it will be an unfunded mandate kasi if the collection is zero, percentage of zero is zero, pero may collection eh. So we have to, if the sponsor will allow me to read the, para the provisions. No? Ano ba dapat ang binibigay sa PhilHealth? Utos ng Universal Healthcare Act. Revenues from excise tax on sugar-sweetened beverages. 50% of total revenue shall be allocated, may word pa na exclusively, to PhilHealth, 80% nito. 80% of the 50%, tama? To PhilHealth, okay. Revenues from excise tax on alcohol products, 50% of total revenue health, 80 to the tune of 80%, of that 50%. Revenues from excise tax on tobacco products, 50% of total excise tax collection from tobacco products shall be exclusively allocated to PhilHealth to the tune of 80% of that 50%. And then revenues from excise tax on heated tobacco products and vapor products, from the total revenues, PhilHealth must be given 80% for the implementation of the Universal Healthcare Act. And then, sa pagkakaintindi ko, ito na yon. That is why umabot tayo sa 74.43 billion sa NEP, because health insurance coverage under sin tax law amounting to 53.13 billion pesos to be used for health insurance premiums of indirect contributors. Plus, inad doon yung 21.17 billion pesos benefit package improvement under the Universal Healthcare Law, plus a smaller amount of 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance, million lang po yun, 127.5 million pesos special purpose insurance coverage for the health insurance premiums of the beneficiaries under Pamana program. Pag isuma total lahat yun yung 74.43 billion pesos na nasa NEP as subsidy to PhilHealth. Pero meron pa nagdi-dispute na hindi yan tama, di ba? Although I must hasten to add na meron pa nga nagdi-dispute dyan that if you properly apply the formula, it should even be a bigger amount than the 74.43 billion pesos. That's the point, Mr. President. And then na-zero na natin. And then, admittedly, ang destinasyon nung na-free up na 74.4 billion pesos, aminado tayong hindi sa directly health purposes, Mr. President. So that's what happened.
And the reality is, even if the government wanted to, it hasn't been able to appropriate, as I mentioned, more than 1 trillion pesos worth of funds that belong to, that should have funded certain laws that have been passed. So, Mr. President, I think we can argue about this all day. I understand the point of the minority leader. What I'm just saying is that with discretion also of the legislative body, we believe that the 600 billion of PhilHealth is for them to be able to utilize. They are not definitely destitutes. They have the funding for it. And if they also show their capability to utilize those funds, next year, definitely it will be a different scenario once we evaluate the progress that they have made. Because we can go back and forth to this, and as the minority leader has said, that doesn't stop him from questioning this from another independent body, the judiciary, to clarify the matter.
Yes.
But we stand by the fact that the GA is also a law, looking at the snapshot of hopefully the next year and how we will be able to fund all our priority projects.
So, Mr. President, yun lang, I'm just pointing this out na we may be inviting another case before the Supreme Court because under the theory that the GAA, if we pass this, is amending indirectly the sin tax law, Mr. President, the formula. Well, and then, Mr. President, para na rin po hindi humaba, can I just make of note my observations and then request in writing some further information about them, Mr. President. So for example, we increased the Office of the President budget by 5.4 billion pesos. Ang tanong na lang siguro why, in writing na lang po. Kasi pwede naman nung sa plenary, pwede naman talagang nailabas na lang yun kung if they really need additional 5.4
Mr. President, if
billion.
may I clarify it, because I think it's for good reason. This was actually a request because all of a sudden, we have been chosen or we have been assigned to host the ASEAN summits. Dapat yan kasi Myanmar. For some reason, some delegates said na they're not comfortable because maybe of some political situation in Myanmar, and the next is the Philippines. So that's exactly the amount that is needed for the ASEAN. That is the only addition because when they did the NEP, wala pa yung designation sa atin.
Meaning to say that this 5.4 billion was reflected in the Senate committee report.
Yes, Mr.
Correct.
President.
Okay. So congratulations for that and thank you for pointing that out, Mr. President. Nasunod yung ating version.
Finally, no?
Yes, thank you. Then, Mr. President, ito kung pwede na lang din in writing unless of course our chairwoman feels the need to explain it right now. The Office of the Secretary of the Department of Agriculture suffered a decrease of 22.3 billion pesos. O bakit po? Malaki po yon. Department of Education, the Office of Secretary Angara also suffered a decrease of 12 billion pesos. Bakit na lang po? 12 billion, yes. And even the UP system, we reduced it by 641 million pesos. Bakit po? And then, dinilimit ko na lang po yung sa mga malalaking halaga. Like the Office of the Secretary ng Department of Health, 25.7 billion pesos. Bakit po? Binawasan natin siya. Halos 10% po ng budget din niya yun. The ILG Secretary, Office of the Secretary, by 10.9 million pesos. Sa Department of Labor, the Office of the Secretary, malaki-laki rin po yung dinecrease natin dito, 16.8 billion pesos. Tapos, napakalaki naman nung dinagdag natin sa Office of the Secretary ng DPWH, 288.6 billion pesos. Siguro po dito pagdating sa DPWH, kung pwedeng may special request ako if ma-identify how much of these are flood control projects because yan po yung parang sensitive issue of the day, Mr. President. DSWD, Office of the Secretary, we are reducing it by 94.3 billion pesos. Ano pong apektado rito? Is it what particular program? Can we, this one ma'am, can we, Madam Chair, can we provide details right now? Is it 4Ps? Is it AX? What's affected, Madam Chairwoman?
Pero yung AX, tumaan.
Ito ba? Basahin mo pa.
So ano nga yung mga nababa?
Sumatotal nito mga to. Sumatotal ba yung baba? Ito?
Yung AX ba tumaas? Ano yung mga tumaas? Kasi mas mataas pa rin kasi last year.
Minus siya.
Ay, ito lang kasama sa 74 nito. Tama ba?
Kasi tinaas na nila. Kasi tinaas na nila. Ay, Okay, wait ka muna sa akin.
Ito
So
lang
yung
special purpose funds.
from NEP, ano yung 4Ps? Ano yung 4Ps sa NEP?
Sino nga kasama? Si 74, sino pa? Bakit pa mo?
114.
25.
Ay ngayon, anong binigay natin? Okay.
89, tsaka ito. Ito plus ito, so 7. Ito. Ayun. Malaki rin.
Ito mang dati sa 35 yung tinaasan ng House sa 26. Binawi na po. Pero effectively sa maas ka pa rin is mga
Ano dapat? Okay, Mr. President,
Yes, ma'am.
initially, there's been a decrease in the 4Ps program from the proposed NEP. And then, but then there's also from the NEP actually, there's been an increase in the IX program.
yes ma'am sa ayos po.
So in the IX. So, as you know, with the 4Ps program, there's also a status of like the certain families graduating from the 4Ps program.
But for the DSWD Office of the Secretary to be decreased by 94.3 billion, malaki po 'yun. That could not have come from the 4 Ps programs decrease, Mr. President.
Sa DSWD po, meron po increase from NEP to Gabang House na 23 billion. Now, nung papunta na tayo ng Bicam, parang withdraw pa lang. Tinawasan nila yan.
So there's an increase from NEP,
Yes ma'am.
Net cut.
Ng mga
83 billion. Ito yung kabuuan ng DSWD.
yes, yes,
From the
yes ma'am. Yes ma'am.
OSEC. So,
Nag-increase sila ng 83 billion from NEP to Gabang. Ngayon, nung papunta natin sa Bicam, tinanggal nila yung mga increases nila ma'am.
pero
Tinawasan nila.
binawasan nila pero mas mataas pa rin.
Yes ma'am sa ayos po.
So in the IX. So, as you know, with the 4Ps program, there's also a status of like the certain families graduating from the 4Ps program.
But for the
1 minute
DSWD
suspension,
Office
Mr.
of the
President.
Secretary
Session suspended.
to be decreased by 94.3 billion, malaki po 'yun. That could not have come from the 4 Ps programs decrease, Mr. President.
Sa DSWD po, meron from NEP to Gabang House na 23 billion. Now, nung papunta na tayo ng Bicam, parang withdraw pa lang. Tinawasan nila yan.
So there's an increase from NEP,
Yes ma'am.
Net cut.
Ng mga
83 billion. Ito yung kabuuan ng DSWD.
yes, yes,
From the
yes ma'am. Yes ma'am.
OSEC. So,
Nag-increase sila ng 83 billion from NEP to Gabang. Ngayon, nung papunta natin sa
time in our society and economy and to see what fiscal space we have. Mr. President,
Wait. Thank you for that, Mr.
in
President.
the
But
IX.
unfortunately,
As you know,
I think
the
when we
4Ps
apply the
program, there's
formula
also a status of like
for
for the Office of the
what is to be
Secretary of the
remitted to
DSWD
PhilHealth
from the
under
4Ps
the
program.
UHCA.
Dun sa
This is based on
National
the
Expenditure
for
Program,
the-
yung
for the
proposal. 1 minute
DSWD
suspension
Office
ng
of the
executive.
Secretary to
226 billion 665
be
million.
decreased by
Pagdating sa GAB,
94.3 billion,
naging
malaki po
310
yun.
billion
That could not have
142.
come from
Sila din ang
the 4
nag-increase.
Ps programs decrease.
Pero
Mr.
pagdating sa
President.
BICAM, sila rin yung nagtanggal, naging 215 billion 818. So if we actually look at the NEP to the GAB, there is a decrease of 10 billion. Hindi naman from 310 to 250,
An increase from now.
like almost 100 billion.
Ito yung kabuuan ng
Kasi sila din hindi ko nga maintindihan sila rin ang nag-increase nun, Mr. President.
from the-
Pero sila rin ang nagtanggal.
OSEC.
Kaya nga siguro in writing na lang, Mr. President,
Yes, Mr.
kung
President.
what would
Time
what programs
in our society and economy and to
DSWD,
see what fiscal
lodged
space
under
we
the
have.
budget for the Office of the Secretary will be
President.
affected by this 94.3 billion peso decrease. Yan lang po. Apa. And then, ito pong DOTR, Office of the Secretary, also suffers a decrease of 17.5 billion pesos. So in writing na lang po. Pero ang question ko po, yung idea po ni Senator J.V. Ejercito na balak niya sanang iakyat or ilagay sa programmed appropriations yung mga some items na nasa ilalim dapat ng DOTR, Office of the Secretary, na linagay sa unprogrammed appropriations, gusto niyang iakyat sa program yun para sure ang funding. Nasunod po ito o hindi?
Actually, yan yung proposal natin sa Senate Committee Report. Pero unfortunately, we are in agreement Actually, Senator JV and I wanted certain DOTR projects to be funded.
Yes,
But
especially with the indulgence of the sponsor, it's the foreign assisted projects. No,
Oo,
that, yes.
pero Mr. President, maraming foreign assisted projects sa DOTR ang na-fund rin. Like sa rail, halimbawa, pati yung Mindanao Rail na-fund, yung North-South rail na-fund rin. So I guess, kung ano yung yun yung mga nandun sa foreign assisted projects. Now, I would also like to remind the body that in the past year, zero yung foreign assisted projects. Ngayon, at least meron tayong 60 plus billion dito sa BICAM. Ito yung mga kaagad-agad kailangan natin bayaran para hindi tayo in default. So I guess the others were put in unprogrammed because we still have some breathing space or some leeway to be able to fund it that we are still not in default.
Thank you for that clarification. Meaning to say there are 60 billion pesos worth of foreign assisted projects, most likely the government counterpart amounts which are found in the program part of the appropriation.
Yes, Mr. President.
But these are not found in the budget for the Office of the Secretary of the DOTR. Saan siya nakalagay? Kasi 50.6 billion lang po ang total ng budget ng Office of the Secretary of the DOTR. That is not enough. 50.6 is not enough to fund 60 billion
But
foreign
that's just the
assistance.
Office of the Secretary. Di ba? Meron
Saan po
mga specific
saan po nakalagay?
projects that are mentioned. That's not the entire...
Nasa specific agency na. Ang dalawa na lang ipopointed ko. Ched, Nia, tapos
Hindi lang. Anong total budget?
hindi ko na sa for the record.
The entire budget of the DOTR is 87 billion, Mr. President. Yung OSEC lang yung sinasabi natin na
Correct.
50
Yes.
billion should be less than the FAPs. But kasi hindi naman lahat ng FAP nandun sa DOTR.
Yes. okay,
Meron
thank
mga
you.
iba na hindi rin doon.
So found in the other agencies' budgets. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for that input, Mr. President. And then just in writing, Mr. President, the decrease in the budget of the CHED by 26.9 billion pesos. Bakit po siya na-decrease ng ganito? And then saan yung NIA? I also noticed sa NIA, National Irrigation Administration, it also suffers a decrease of 23.1 billion pesos.
Mr.
May-
President, I think it's not a new, it's not new to us, our disappointment with NIA's utilization and disbursement rate. So, tinignan lang natin kung ano ba talaga yung mga maiimplementa talaga nila.
Pero I'm assuming na yung NIA GAB level na 92.5 billion pesos, yan din yung NEP level. Is that correct?
No, Mr.
No?
President, actually na-increase. Na-increase yun, kaya nga
So may we know the NEP level for NIA?
42 lang siya sa NEP, Mr. President. 42 billion lang siya sa NEP.
So that means walang, theoretically, just looking at the amounts, dapat walang tatamaan sa NIA programs under the NEP. Kasi 42 billion siya, and then ang final approval is 69.3 billion. Last point na. And my last point, Mr. President, which I'm just stating for the record, and of course in the interest of transparency, because it involves Congress, our institutions, Mr. President. After the BICAM, the Senate's budget will be increased by 1.1 billion pesos, and the House of Representatives budget will be increased by 17.3 billion pesos. So ang start ng Senate, 12.8 billion pesos plus 1.1 billion pesos. Ang budget natin is 13.9 billion pesos. Ang House of Representatives, ang starting amount nila 16.3 billion pesos, ang increase nila 17.3 billion pesos, ang ending budget nila 33.6 billion pesos. Ang aking lang basic point dito, Mr. President, kung ganito rin pala ang ending ng mga ang amounts, bakit hindi na lang linabas natin sa plenary at tiniskas? Bakit kailangan sa BICAM pa mangyayari ito, Mr. President, na halos lumampas pa sa doble ang budget ng isang chamber na bala ko sanang samahan na, salihan next year, Mr. President. But we have to be transparent with we have to be transparent about all of this, Mr. President. Na, 'di ba, if you need, okay, we'll use mathematical terms. If you need 2x instead of x, bakit hindi pa na-reflect yan dun sa original bill na final mo? Sana pinare-reflect mo na yung 33 billion pesos na pangangailangan mo. That's my point, Mr. President. So I'm not expecting an explanation from our chairwoman kasi hindi naman niya ito kagagawan. So for more transparency in our budget process sana, we will discuss it sa floor. And then is our Senate Secretary here? Medyo mabuti is not here because I will talk about him, Mr. President. Okay. But he should not take this personally. Okay, para lang for the information of our colleagues. During the budget season, I interpolated on the Senate's budget. Okay. So happy kayo for the first time nag-appear ang ating Senate Secretary to answer questions. Ano yan? A basic factual question. For the year 2024, yung 2 billion increase ng Senate budget, sa BICAM ba nangyari o hindi? Ang sagot sa akin, sa plenary nating ginawa, which I accepted. But upon further research, I was given a wrong answer. Sa BICAM din po nangyari yun. Just like what is happening now, we also increased the Senate's budget by 1.1 billion pesos. So, just to make that clear, Mr. President, no, na
Mr. President, actually, nung second and third reading, nandun na yung increase natin na 1.1
dito,
billion.
for this year, for 2025 po yan. I'm talking about when I was asking the Senate Secretary about the 2024 budget of
Wala
the
pa ako
Senate.
nun,
Opo,
Mr.
hindi po sa yan.
Kasi akala ko ako yung sinasabihan mo
Hindi
eh.
po. That's why sabi ko nga, I'm talking about our Senate Secretary. So, just to be very, very transparent, no? Sana po magbigay din tayo ng mga accurate na sagot, Mr. President. Because marami na rin tayong experience dito sa budget season. Sagot lang na sagot para lang matapos na yung proseso. Alam mo, sometimes binobola ka lang nung mga iba. Pero, well, anyway,
Hindi kita
Mr. President.
binobola, Mr. President.
No, that is one. That is some of our resource persons, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I would like to put on record that I do not totally agree with everything that's been proposed also by the House. Unfortunately, I'm also trying to safeguard certain key points that I feel that we are more passionate about and what we believe we should also be able to protect. As the Senate President has mentioned, this is not a zero-sum game. Unfortunately, we all have our wish lists. Their budget is much larger because they're a bigger house, I suppose. But then the reality is we have to, like for example, certain projects, we've added provisions to make sure that there is a repertorial process for us to be able to monitor and audit whatever funding we have placed in some initiatives we feel needs to be safeguarded more profoundly.
Well, at the end of the day, budgeting is a political process, Mr. President. Alam ko naman yon. So, I'm just doing this, katulad doon sinabi ko sa umpisa, this is the duty of the minority to ask questions and to bring out facts, just especially in the interest of transparency. So our people will know, kasi ang ginagastos natin dito would be taxes taken from the people, non-tax revenues also taken from the people, plus loans, debt, national debt incurred in the name of the people. So that's the purpose, Mr. President, just for transparency's sake. So with that, I end my interpellation on the BICAM committee report, Mr. President.
Our due thanks to the extensive interjections of our distinguished Minority Floor Leader, as usual. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, next to make a manifestation is Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri. I move that he be recognized.
Senator Zubiri is recognized. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to put on record, with, of course, affects yung FIVOX. Yung FIVOX po, Mount Canloon is already erupting as we speak, Mr. President. And I promised them the funds for their modernization of their equipment. Hiyang-hiya po ako sa kanila. I'm actually very embarrassed because nabawasan pa yung budget nila. The NEP was at 354 million and now their budget is at 319 million. At sinabi, and of course, our BICAM report was at 384. So they had about a 30 million increase in the BICAM report, and then, in the Senate approval. Pagdating sa BICAM, nabawasan sila ng mas mababa pa sa NEP, Mr. President. I have to put this on record because ayoko naman po magalit sila sa akin. Sabihin nila, I am remiss at my job as being the chairman of the Committee on the Science and Technology Budget. So, I just want to put that on record because I don't want to lose face, Mr. President, to the department. I apologize to them. I guess the chairperson, together with the technical staff, tried their best. But, if there are problems, climate change happens, and we should not blame Pag-asa, we should not blame FIVOX. They're not to blame because we did not give them the equipment that they deserve. Second, Mr. President, is PhilPost. Yung Franklin privileges na binigay natin 100 million, which we give every year as a Senate, tinanggal po. Wala na pong Franklin privileges under PhilPost. So therefore, wala na pong libreng mailing Franklin privilege yung DOJ, which they were, the Justice Judiciary, which were expected from us in the COMELEC. I don't know how we will explain that to them and how we'll explain to PhilPost because now PhilPost has to pay for it and I know they don't have the income for it, Mr. President. Zero budget din sila. So yun naman po, with a heavy heart, I still support the budget, Mr. President. I trust your leadership. And I will support this budget. Yun lang, with a heavy heart, I just feel bad that the Department of Science and Technology was not given the proper increases that they deserved. So yun lamang po, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
We thank the gentleman for his understanding and continued support. Thank you, Senator Zubiri. Majority Leader.
With that, Mr. President, I move that we approve and ratify the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing votes of House Bill number 10800 and let the text of the joint explanation be deemed read into the records of the chamber.
It's the pleasure of the lady from what is the pleasure of the Honorable Ontiveros?
Salamat Abi, Mr. President. With all due respect and thanks to the Good Finance Committee Chair, Senator Grace, and the Senate President, Senator Chiz,
Bicameral Conference Committee report, if I may, Mr. President.
The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, this is just to put on record our agreement with the majority of the members of the Senate in ratifying the 2025 budget. However, Mr. President, it's also disheartening to note, Mr. President, that some of our institutional amendments, namely for TESDA, for the creative industry and the integrators of our enterprise-based and education training were not carried. We feel, Mr. President, that this is very important items, and we hope, Mr. President, that our agency, our beloved agency, our TESDA, would step up and fill in the gaps, Mr. President. I would also like to put into the records, Mr. President, my personal point of view when it comes to the passage of the GAA, which is also another law, Mr. President. It may be different from other laws that we have already passed, but it is a law, the GAA. When some people are talking about the constitutionality, Mr. President, remember, wala pa pong PhilHealth noong nagkaroon tayo ng konstitusyon. At ikatlo, Ginoong Pangulo, naniniwala din tayo na dapat pagtuunan ng pansin yung mga nangangailangang ahensya ng ating pamahalaan. Kaya tayo ay nag-a-agree din sa desisyon ng mayorya sa pamumuno ng ating chairperson, Senator Grace po. Maraming salamat, Ginoong Pangulo, at may God bless us all.
Noted and entered into the records. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, last week, a manifestation is Senator Christopher Bongo. I move that he be recognized.
Senator Goy is recognized. You may proceed, sir.
Mr. President, although I commend some of the provisions advocated in the BICAM report, I just want to manifest my strong reservation on some of the provisions of the bicameral conference committee report, which I personally find unacceptable. I did not also sign the BICAM report because details of the reconciled budget were not available earlier. This is also in line in support of the manifestation of Senator De La Rosa during the opening of the BICAM to give the members time to review prior to signing. Bakit po ako pipirma sa isang dokumento na hindi ko naman po alam ang detalye? First, I am saddened by the zero budget given to PhilHealth. As chairman of the Committee on Health, advocacy ko po ang health. Dapat po ang pondo ng PhilHealth ay para sa health. Kaya nga po, PhilHealth. Lessons learned dapat tayo sa pandemya. We should invest more in health. Katumbas po yan ang buhay ng bawat Pilipino. Kaya dapat bigyan po natin ng priority ang health. While we acknowledge that PhilHealth has still billions in reserve funds. Sabi nila 500 billion as discovered and discussed in 5 hearings conducted by the Committee on Health. Subsidy from the national government may still be needed to implement necessary reforms and improvements in its benefit packages. Huwag naman zero budget. Sa huli, ang mga mahihirap na pasyente na naman ang kawawa dyan. We kept on urging PhilHealth to expand its benefit packages especially for top 10 mortality diseases, increase case rates, scrap its restrictive policies like the 24-hour confinement policy, cover additional services like dental. Tinupad na nila yung dental recently, optometric services and assistive device. Paano po magbe-benefit ang mga pasyente kung zero ang budget ng PhilHealth? I also want to highlight that Republic Act 11223 or the Universal Healthcare UHC law also mandates that the amount necessary to implement the provisions of the UHC shall be included in the GAA. Ito po yung nakolekta noong 2023. Dapat po nakalaan po ito para sa 2025 and shall be appropriated under the DOH and the national government subsidy to PhilHealth. May pinanggalingan na po yan tulad ng syntax collections na dapat ay para sa implementation po ng UHC. Nasa batas po yan. May earmarking po yan under Republic Act 11346 at Republic Act 11467 or the syntax law. There is also a provision in the UHC Act that premium subsidy for indirect contributors shall be included annually in the General Appropriations Act. Bigyan sana natin ng maayos at sapat na budget ang PhilHealth at hikayatin ang PhilHealth na i-maximize ang paggamit ng kanilang pondo para sa kanilang mga health-related programs and services. At dapat sana kung ano ang budget na nawala sa PhilHealth, dapat sana ay mapunta sana sa health. Ang budget ng health dapat para sa health. Hindi ko alam kung saan napunta ang 74 billion na dapat sana para sa PhilHealth at para sa health. Kung may tinanggal na budget sa PhilHealth, dapat kulang. Kung may tinanggal na budget sa PhilHealth dahil kulang ang benepisyo na binibigay nito, dapat sa health programs din po ilagay ito. Dapat hindi po sa iba. I also want to highlight the decrease in the budget of the AFP modernization program from the 50 billion approved in the Senate. Tinaasan natin dito sa Senado from the 40 billion approved in the House, naging 35 billion na lang po. As I manifested during the plenary deliberations, importante po ang modernization ng AFP para mapanatili ang kapayapaan at seguridad ng bansa. Anyway, kahit may reservation po ako, nakakalungkot. Just want to put that on record. Thank you, Mr. President.
Duly noted and entered into the records. Thank you, Senator Go. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I would like to react also to not react. Just before you close this, I would just like to say that, of course, your chairman endeavored to get all of your advocacies in. We did what we could also to protect our initiatives. But again, as I said, we have very limited fiscal space. And when it comes to PhilHealth, hindi po mawawala ng benepisyo ang ating mga kababayan. Meron pong 600 bilyon na pwede nilang gamitin dito. Tapos ang DOH mula sa NEP tumaas ang budget ng 30 billion. Yung pagdating naman sa AFP, tumaas ang budget nila ng 29 billion from the NEP. So yun lamang po. Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Grace. Majority Floor Leader. Duly noted and entered into the records.
With that, Mr. President, we now move on and move that we issue consideration of Senate Bill number 2898 under committee report number 428. This is the bill on the liberalizing the lease of private lands by foreign investors. So move, Mr. President.
Before acting on the motion of the Majority Leader, Chair would like to make a short manifestation as well. Since I remember having said this earlier in the BICAM, it is not in the records of the Senate. Walang batas na perpekto, hindi perpekto ang batas na ito na inaprubahan lamang natin. May mga nalagay, may hindi nalagay, may natuwa, may hindi natuwa, may nagalit, may napangiti. Subalit maging ganun pa man, ang trabaho ng Kongreso ay pumili sa pagitan ng mga bagay na pwedeng ponduhan kung alin dito ang uunahin. Lahat mahalaga, lahat importante. Subalit, kailangan natin magpasa at pumili kung alin. Nais ko lang tugunan sana partikular, yung nababanggit palagi kaugnay sa PhilHealth. 2 buwan na ang lumilipas, nagsalita ako sa isang press con dito sa Senado at sinabi kong pinag-aaralan nating tanggalin yung 74 billion na pangbayad ng premium ng PhilHealth. Dahil nga, yung 500 sobra-sobra, kaya sinubukang bawasan, binalik ng Korte Suprema yung ilan at pinagbawal na, pero mula sa 500, bumaba ng 400 at 40, sa ngayon, 600 billion muli yun. Dadagdagan pa natin uli ng 74 para sa ano, hindi naman dinadagdagan yung benepisyo. Sa totoo lang, nasa charter ng PhilHealth na pwede nilang gastusin ang kanilang pondo para sa coverage, universal coverage ng PhilHealth. Ang mangyayari po lamang dito, mula sa isang bulsa ng PhilHealth chargeable sa reserve fund nila, ililipat sa kabilang bulsa na hindi naman nila ginagastos pa rin para sa benepisyo ng mga miyembro nila. Yung mga nagbabayad ng contribution tulad natin na sumusweldo, dati nang nandun yun. Yung 74 billion para sa coverage ng universal coverage ng mga hindi formally employed. Having said that, I'd like that to be entered into the records as well, and Chair would now like to act on the motion. Consideration of the aforementioned bill is now in order. Sorry for the little delay, Minority Leader. The Minority Leader is now...
Just to be accurate, Mr. President, 53 billion would be for the indirect contributors.
I stand corrected,
Because
yes.
21 billion is to supplement the
Yes.
package enhancement, Mr. President.
I stand corrected, Your Honor. Now, Senator Pimentel is recognized to for the aforementioned bill made mention of by the Majority Floor Leader on the 99-year lease.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'd like to attribute this bill to the author, Mr. President, who is our Senate President.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And congratulations for your imaginative thinking in coming up with this proposal, Mr. President. So this representation is ready to answer questions if there are any, Mr. President. But I think no one listed for interpellation.
There being no reservation for interpellation, I move to close the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Any objection? Period of interpellation and debate is now closed. Majority Leader?
I move to open the period of amendments of Senate Bill number 2898 and recognize again, once again, our Minority Leader, Senator Pinal, for his individual amendments.
There are amendments, Mr. President, and
The gentleman may proceed.
yes, the next three amendments all come from Senator Risa Ontiveros, Mr. President. On page 4, line 6, after the phrase "in accordance with law," add the following sentence: "This shall be without prejudice to a periodic review of the terms of the lease to be done by the BOI or the appropriate IPA, period. The continuation of the lease shall be subject to the listed parties." I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection to the proposed amendment? Hearing none. Amendment is approved.
On page 4, line 27, after the phrase, may andito. Pati ba? Yes, sir. Andito na to eh. Okay. After the phrase, line 27, contributions to the country and insert the line, I'm sorry, Mr. President, I will rephrase. On page 4, line 27, after the phrase contributions to the country, insert the line and the communities in which the land is located. Therefore, making subparagraph 4 read as follows: in addition to the conditions for the renewal of a lease contract, the foreign lessee shall show that it has made social and economic contributions to the country and the communities in which the land is located. Then retain the semicolon and the word "and." Thank you. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection to the proposed amendment? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
On page 5, line 3, insert a new paragraph 6 under section 4 as follows. Number 6, close and open parenthesis. In the case of agricultural and agroforestry lands, comma, the terms of the lease shall be subject to the rules on conversion and the rules of the Department of Agrarian Reform, open parenthesis, DAR, capital DAR, close parenthesis, governing joint venture agreements in agroforestry lands, period. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection to the proposed amendment? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
That would be all, Mr. President.
Mr. President, with no other individual amendment, I move to close the period of amendment.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2898. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill number 2898 is hereby approved on second reading. Congratulations and thank you, Senator Pimentel.
Yes,
Majority Leader?
Mr. President, with the consent of the body, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill numbers 5851, 7007, 5828, 5831, 5832, 5837, 5836, 5833, 5556.
Session is suspended for a minute.
Mr. President, I withdraw the previous motion. Instead, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2897 under Committee Report number 426. This is the bill amending the Safe Spaces Act. So move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Motion is approved.
There being no member who wishes to interpret, I move to close the period of interpellation. Safe Spaces. Kay Risa tayo.
Any objection? Period of interpellation and debate is hereby is now closed.
I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2897.
Amendments.
I withdraw that previous motion, Mr. President. Minute suspension.
1 minute
Mr.
suspension.
With no committee or individual amendment, I move to approve on,
Close.
I move to close the period of amendment, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Period of individual and committee amendments hereby closed.
With
Majority
no,
Leader?
with no committee or individual amendment, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2897. So move, Mr.
Any
President.
objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill number 2897 is approved on third reading. On second reading, rather.
Minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session is suspended.